Hello again, brothers and sisters. Franklin Jones here again, the author of the book, The Black Matrix, also known as The Black People's Matrix. Today, our subject will be the, the debunking the myth of Willie Lynch. Now, I know there are many out there who believes it. I mean, they have many reasons to believe it from their perspective. It was recited by the Minister Farrakhan at the Million Man March. It was also stated by the actor Denzel Washington in one of the movies he did. So a lot of people believes it to be true. And the reason why many people believe it to be true, because from their understanding, they say, how can it not be true when we're seeing these symptoms? When the mind is ignorant, the eyes can easily fool you. What's more important is we have to learn the truth. And why is it important to learn the truth? Is because if our understanding of our plight and condition is flawed, then all remedies that stems from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. The oppressed must gain the truth in order to liberate themselves. So therefore, Willie Lynch is a falsehood. I'm going to show you it's a falsehood. And then I'm going to lead you into reveal to you the truth of our plight and condition. It's a science, not story of a slave master who did something to us many years ago. But I'm going to explain why you believe it, how it exists. Now, the most effective lies are the one that mix a little bit of truth with the lies. Okay, there are those who will defend that little bit of truth, and that while defending that little bit of truth, it keeps the lie intact. It's a tactic they do, so we have to understand this. Our ancestors were brutalized, were made to believe less of themselves. It was a reducibilitating acculturation process where the Europeans would beat our people and force their ideologies, their religion, everything onto our people. And everything about us was marginalized and everything about them was exalted. Now, it had different names. The process had different names throughout, depending on what region you were located. The process they did in Africa had a different name, and different parts of America had different names. But in Georgia, it was called seasoning. Seasoning. Our ancestors were seasoned by their slave masters, okay? When a enslaver was selling and enslaved Africans to a potential buyer, the buyer would always ask the question, is this slave well seasoned? And the seller would say, you damn right, my slave's well seasoned. Check him out. And the buyer would walk up to the enslaved African and hit him in the face. If the African responded, if the African looked with contempt in his eyes, he's not well seasoned. Send him back. I can't buy him. Now with the woman, is this woman well seasoned? Try her out. The white enslaver would try her out by placing his hand in her crotch area. Does she respond? Does she try to push him away? Or does she just let him do it? If you let them do it, you were well seasoned. Okay? Now, however, this seasoning process didn't program us like robots for the next 400 years. See, that's BS. Okay? We have to decipher truth. We have to function based upon truth. That's not how you enslave. It's not possible to brainwash people in that manner. True brainwashing requires a system that's being constantly reapplied upon the minds of a targeted population. If not, the system will lose its effect as generation moves on and not worsening as we see among ourselves. An example of this is during 1960s, African Americans, we call ourselves brothers and sisters. We've said black is beautiful. Now today we're calling ourselves niggers and bitches, and we tend to put ourselves down. We were wearing afros in the 60s. Now we're wearing weaves, blonde weaves. So if our condition today was truly connected to something that happened to us during slavery, our conditions would have been worse during the 60s and would have been lesser today because this current generation is moved further away from slavery. The fact that we are worse today than we were during the 60s is evidence of another system has been applied to our minds. We have to understand this system in order to liberate ourselves. Another evidence that I can show you that the Willie Lynch is not true, first of all, is the same symptoms that you see among an African who was a descendant of enslaved Africans. You can see those same symptoms among Africans who are not descendants of enslaved Africans. Now, the fact that Africans whose parents have never been enslaved, their grandparents have never been enslaved, and so on, have the same symptoms as those of us in our communities who are descendants of those who have been enslaved, this is another evidence that the condition is not caused by a slave trade. That's not what's happening to us. We must gain an accurate understanding of our plight and condition. White oppressive forces deliberately spread disinformation into our community because they know in order for us to liberate ourselves, we have to learn the truth. Once a people learn the truth, inherently they seek out remedies. This is an inherent part of the human condition. Once you are aware of a danger, you develop and you implement systems to remove yourself from the danger as a necessity to save yourself. Now, see, that's why the white men don't want us to know the truth. They want to keep us believing in falsehoods. Now, let me give an example of how proper information frees you while disinformation keeps you mentally enslaved. Let's use a scenario. Let's imagine that there's an African village, okay? And these foreigners came from the sea, white European foreigners, and the Africans allow these foreigners to settle on land to their right, 10 miles to their right. Now, let's say these white foreigners, they go and they poison, they want the land that the Africans are on. They want the land because that land has a beachfront property. That's the land they want. So they put poison in the well water. So now all of a sudden, the Africans are dying. They're falling, dying. They don't know what's happening. If you don't know what's happening, what happens? You start creating speculations. You start saying, okay, we're cursed. You start saying this, you're saying God's mad at us. You start saying all these things trying to understand because you don't know why people are dying. Now, once the proper information is revealed, that they are then told that their well has been poisoned. And the reason why they're dropping like flies is because their well is poisoned. Once the Africans realize the true information, this expands the radius of their understanding. And that expanded radius results in them developing systems to stop the poisoning of their people. First, they will stop drinking water from the well. Okay? They will shut the well down. They will dig a new well, and they will place guards on that well. And then they will send soldiers to remove those foreigners off of that land. Now, the point here is the proper information breeds the proper results, the proper remedies. The misinformation kept them confused and lost. This is why it's important for people to be given the proper information regarding their plight and their condition. Willie Lynch is nothing to do with our plight and condition. As long as we believe it, we will remain mentally enslaved and confused by the white society. The Willie Lynch letter was actually written in 1970 by Dr. Kwabena Ashanti, who just died this year, matter of fact, in February of this year, just died. Okay, he confirmed he wrote it, everything. He wrote it. Now, we also know that the Willie Lynch letter is false because when experts examined the letter, they found that it contained modern words that were inconsistent with the time period of the 1700 date that the letter shows. The fact that those words were not used, were not created yet in the 1700s, once the expert sees these words throughout it that are modern words, this confirms that the Willie Lynch is not true. Now, when the brother wrote the Willie Lynch, he wrote it in an attempt and an effort to bring to our attention our division, by focusing on our division, how we are controlled. But the symptoms he's talking about, was what he's witnessing, was not caused by Willie Lynch. It was caused by the socializing of black people. Now, however, when Dr. Ashanti wrote it, white oppressive forces took the information and spread it throughout our black communities. Many black people have reported receiving emails from unknown senders in their email of Willie Lynch. Many. Why are we getting this? Why are we getting this Willie Lynch? In fact, my own mother called me. I remember years ago. I got a Willie Lynch letter. And she started reading it to me. I said, from who? She doesn't know. These things were just sent around all over. Why is this? Because when black people believe in Willie Lynch, this does not benefit us. It weakens us. It makes our condition worse. In the doctrine of psychological warfare, as taught in the U.S. military and all of its war colleges, and in the FBI Academy, CIA Academy, they teach that the most effective way to subdue and control a targeted population without actually fighting them is to bombard them with propaganda that misleads them to believe that their core problem lies within themselves. Once the people are made to believe that their core problem lies within themselves, that their core problem is an internalized one, this shifts their collective aggressions away from their true enemies and it redirects it against themselves. This is what happens when black people believes in Willie Lynch. Willie Lynch also gives black people a false reason to doubt our ability to come together against our oppressors. Well, you know that Willie Lynch. We believe it, so it mentally enslaves us. Willie Lynch does not liberate the black man. It mentally enslaves the black man. Willie Lynch benefits the system of white supremacy. It is a falsehood. The worst enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. The worst enemy of knowledge is false knowledge. Because an ignorant person might continue to pursue and search for knowledge. But an ignorant person, believing that his false knowledge is true, stops searching for knowledge. Therefore, he becomes mentally enslaved by the false knowledge. Now ask yourself, when a black person truly believes that Willie Lynch is true, does it benefit his psyche? Does it benefit our community? No. That black person who truly believes that Willie Lynch is true, he then only noticed those negative things in our communities that appears to confirm the Willie Lynch story. And he becomes psychologically blinded from noticing the greater evidence refuting it. This is a social science. These people have studied how to hijack the human mind. We have to recognize what's happening to us. Now, the truth of our plighted condition is that white oppressive forces controls us by perpetually keeping us believing the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Through their media propaganda campaign that constantly inundates us with negative narratives about ourselves is how we're truly controlled by them. People are easily controlled by the narratives that they receive about themselves. If people constantly receive positive narratives about themselves, for example, this elevates their self-esteem. This unifies them. They start functioning based upon those narratives, even though narratives aren't true. Now, when you constantly inundate people with negative narratives, the exact opposite happens. They become self-hating. They start to resent each other. They start to hate each other. This is what believing in the Willie Lynch does to black people. Now, this is why the fact that I've showed you our condition is not connected to Willie Lynch, because we have Africans globally who display the same behaviors who are not descendants of enslaved Africans. We have experts who examined the letter and found that it has modern words in it. We have Dr. Shanti who says but present evidence that he is the author of it. So it is not true. It is not true. Now, and it benefits the system of white supremacy. What the white man does, he demoralizes us through his propaganda campaigns which allows him to maintain his dominance over us. Now, here is when this came about. This came about during the 1960s. Yep, the 1960s. In 1968, LBJ first of all, in 1960, we don't know, African Americans' unified black protest was unprecedented. African Americans confronted white racism exceeds all other racial groups in American history. So the LBJ put together a committee called the Kerner Commission. And their job was to study the African American community, to find out a reason for this unprecedented black protest, and to come up with remedies, to come up with solutions for correcting the problem. Now, mind you, if you've read about the Kerner Report in your little magazines, you're not seeing the full story. You're only seeing the part of the story that the government reveals to the public, okay? This is the hidden portion, okay, that I got from my own sources. I've been doing this for 30 years. What they determined from studying the African American community, they found aggravating core factors for the unprecedented unified black protests. One of the first factors was blatant white racism. They said blatant white racism was the cause of the problem. So this resulted in the white society abandoning their uses of blatant institutionalized racism and developing more covert methods for deploying racism against black people, okay? Now, they deplore racism against black people is a reason for these tactics. Although all white governments professes equality for all their citizens, they are actually unrelentingly committed to the preservation of their nation's white dominance. And this has always resulted in them developing systems for subjugating black people as a means of holding on to their white dominance. Now, during the 60s, it was determined by the Kerner Commission that the blatant racist systems had ran its course, had become no longer effective. It had resulted in unprecedented black protests, and it became morally unacceptable, and it eroded America's global standing in the world. So they had to abandon those tactics, but develop covert tactics that are not as easily recognized by the black community. White racism always prevails best when the black victim no longer recognizes it. The second factor they discovered from studying the African American community, they said it was a elevated and unifying black collective self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. An elevated self-esteem. So now they determined one, blatant white racism was a problem, and a collective elevated self-esteem among black people. Now here's the third thing they discovered. They discovered through studying the African American community that while the white society, utilizing their weaponry advantages of guns and cannons, were able to enslave Africans, invade and enslave Africans, they, however, are not able to maintain peace indefinitely with the Africans, because whenever people are oppressed for long durations, their collective aggressions against the oppressors will continue to grow until acts of rebellion becomes inevitable, okay? This is an inherent part within the human condition. The oppressed always eventually rebels. And this is what was happening during the 60s at such an unprecedented level. So now, what do they now know? They know that the problem was due to blatant white racism, an elevated and unifying black collective self-esteem, and that collective aggressions toward the white society had reached a boiling point. Those are the three factors they recognize. So now once they recognize this, okay, we have to develop systems against what we've identified. Now, since blatant white racism was a factor, they stopped and now use covert white racism. They use things that black people aren't quite understanding, aware of how it works. We can't see it. And now they have to keep our collective self-esteem low. This is why all of our narratives are negative. Now, let us think. Can you not see how unrealistic it actually is that virtually all of our narratives are negative? That's cartoonishly ridiculous. That's not a real world scenario thing. That's a cartoonish scenario. They do that because the objective is to keep our collective self-esteem low. Keeping our collective self-esteem low, in a sense, keeps us in our place. Okay? Now, the next one was to shift our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it against ourselves. We're also bombarded with information that is designed that subliminally tells us, you are your own worst enemy. You are your own worst enemy. Respect and admire whites. You are your own worst enemy. Respect and admire whites. This message is embedded within the propaganda that we receive. It subliminally conveys the message that we are our own worst enemy. We are our own worst enemies. Now, when we see the symptoms among our people, we say, something's wrong. Something's wrong. We can see this is not natural. We can see this is not normal. We can see symptoms among our people that other racial groups aren't doing. So the Willie Lynch gives us a convenience story. Okay, I'm going to use this. You know, sometimes it's easier to fool people than it's to show them that they've been fooled. It's not Willie Lynch. It's the monopoly the white society has over our minds. Okay? They control our image, they control our education, they control everything. And this allowed them to shrewdly indoctrinate thoughts and ideologies into the collective minds of black people that serves and protects the system of white supremacy. We have to start functioning based upon what's true. Now, they first start programming our minds during our early education and development when we're young and our minds are most impressionable by giving us an education that denies of a racially affirming fact. If you study the achievements among the African American community when our schools were segregated, now yes, they denied us good books. They gave us dilapidated schools. Yes, those were factors, and were terrible factors. But when they integrated us, our condition worsened. Because now we were integrated into an educational system that allowed them to start programming our minds from a time that we were young and impressionable with ideologies that served and protect the system of white supremacy. This is why we are learning more black racially affirming fact from each other on social media than we do so from within our schools, okay? Because according to social science, in order for a dominant society to maintain its position of social dominance over the subordinate population, the education given to the subordinate population must deny them of a racially affirming curriculum. When the oppressed, the subordinate population, is given an education that denies them of a racially affirming curriculum, this psychologically conditions them, assigns them to a subordinate status within the dominant white society. During our education development, we are being conditioned, black students are being conditioned to adhere to white dominance over our lives, while white students are being miseducated to believe that they are superior and are inherently superior and are therefore supposed to rule over black people. This is the message. Schools are tools of the government designed to shape the students' minds accordingly. See, we have to understand how it's happening, because when we think as Willie Lynch, a ghost from the past, we do nothing. But if we understand, now we know when our children go to school, when they come home, we know the importance of looking at their curriculum. We now know it's important to go out and research and bring our children the true history. The history we've been distorted is served the white society. The fact that our education is marginalized and theirs is false to exhaust them is also a separate social science. According to social science, they say that a people's future is predestined by the history they are taught to believe about themselves. An inspiring history is necessary because people references their future abilities based upon their past achievements. So the white society distorted the facts of the past to give their racial group assure their racial group of a more affirming future. That's why they're being miseducated and everything is designed to propagate whites. They give themselves credit for 90% of inventions made by black people. They let us have peanut butter and the super soaker. They'll promote that stuff. Super soaker. They're marginalizing us by doing it that way. But the reality is this. Without black people, you wouldn't have cars. You wouldn't have skyscrapers. You wouldn't have air conditioning. You wouldn't have GPS. You wouldn't have the internet. You wouldn't have cell phones. You wouldn't have home security surveillance systems. But see, those are not the narratives that the white society wants you to know. So that the narrative is withheld because those true narratives goes against maintaining white dominance. Because for white dominance to maintain, the narratives fed into a society must exalt whites and marginalize us. And that's what's happening. This is why black students are taught that we have no history, that our racial group have not invented much throughout history. And this is still happening now in our modern times. Black children graduate from high school believing that we haven't invented much throughout history. We are conditioned to believe lesser of ourselves and more higher of whites. This is the reason why when many black people are given a presentation in a room full of whites, they feel subconscious. This is the reason why when a young black person is talking to a white person, he may sit up straight when talking to a white person. This is why some black people give more respect to whites than they give their own. This is why some black people find it easier to hit their own than hit a white person. We are being conditioned to adhere to white dominance. Social scientists describe this as merely instilling a value system into the collective minds of the subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant society. Okay? So this is what happened during the 60s when they put us in the school. They started socializing our minds. Okay? So once they learned that our problem was connected to an elevated, unifying black collective self-esteem, they had to erode our collective self-esteem. They had to erode it. Now, when the media keeps telling us that we're our own worst enemy, and they start amplifying black on black crime, black on black crime, black on black crime, that is designed to shift our collective aggressions away from the white oppressive society and redirect it against ourselves. And this is why so many black people walk around saying, we are our worst enemy, we are our worst enemies. Now, whenever the oppressed starts thinking and behaving exactly as their oppressors wants them to, it's never coincidental. It's always because the oppressed has been socialized to do so. Now, there are people who says we messed up when we integrated with white people. Now, we have this thing built inside of us to always denigrate ourselves, put ourselves down. The integration, when they integrated our ancestors, they had no idea what was going to be done. They knew that their schools were dilapidated. They knew their schools had old books. So they felt integration into better schools would provide better opportunity for these black children, not realizing that we was sending our children into a burning house in a sense. We were unaware of the damages that the miseducation is doing to the psyche of our children from the time they're very young. And most of us still don't understand this. The average black parent, their only concern regarding their children's academic is their performance. Are you getting A's? Are you getting A's? B's? All right. But most of us, we have been socialized from understanding the importance of education, the true social science behind education. Education is a matter of more than just teaching people math and science. Education is necessary to give people a history that allows to lift their self-esteem, to make them feel good about who they are. But that's not happening to black students. For most black students, their schools are the places where they first experience the implication that there is something lesser about being born black, because they're subjected to an educational system that tells them that they have no history. We're told that our history began in America as slaves. Go to your children's school and look at the textbook. Our history starts with slavery. In places in Africa where the Westerners are dictating the curriculum, African students are being taught that their history started with the colonization of Africa. Now, what does this do to the psyche? This psyche makes us believe, instills white superiority to us, because it's like we was in the darkness and they came into our life and lifted us from the darkness. But the truth is the opposite. So, through our educational process is when they start brainwashing us to think in a way that serves and protects the white society. Once we graduate from our schools, our conditioning is then constantly reapplied through media subliminal programming that constantly keeps us believing the fraudulent worst about ourselves. When you're sitting there watching television, you don't even realize how it affects you. When you're sitting there watching television, you keep seeing negative statistics about black people. You see negative images about black people. Rather than critically thinking, most people don't say, wait a minute, these narratives are controlled by our enemies. This media image is controlled by our enemies. Most people don't critically think like that. Most people, when you keep seeing these negative images, you start to feel embarrassed. You start to feel humiliated. And that humiliation, that constant humiliation, causes you to start resenting your people. Man, why we can't get our shit together? Why we can't get our shit together? Bam! Why we can't get our shit together? And you start resenting. And then some of us say, you know what? I gotta go and show white people that we're not all the same. I gotta show white people that some of us are good. How? So so you see how the programming works? It starts doing our education and development, and then it's continued re-implied throughout our entire life through unrelenting media subliminal programming. Let me give you an example of how this works. Imagine, if you would, a group of people on a ship, and the ship is well functioning. Now, another ship is following that ship, who has control of all of the information, all the media information that's fed into that ship with the first crew on it. And they keep bombarding them with narratives and media images telling them their ship is not seaworthy, that their ship is slowly sinking, that their crew is incompetent, that their ship is lost, that a mutiny is being planned. With time, the group constantly receiving negative information about themselves. They will start to hate each other, despise each other. Some of these people on that ship would dive off of the ship and attempt to swim towards the taunting ship, believing it to be superior, even if their own ship was in fact superior. Those who remain on the ship would watch those swimming away and say, look at those coons. But there's a social science behind this. When black people say, I don't be around black people, it's a psychic adjustment. It's when the humiliation becomes so great that you want to separate yourself from the group. This is what's being done to us. It's also why many black people go out of their way to say, I'm not allowed, I have white in me, you know. My grandma was white. I have white in me. I have white in me. Shit, if I had white in me, you would never hear about that shit because I'd be embarrassed. I hide that shit. I'm not a racist, but I merely have the same pride that they have for themselves. White people, they have a black grandfather. They don't tell you about it. They don't tell you about it because they haven't been socialized to to praise us as we have been socialized to praise them. You know, our enemies controls the information that we receive. Those who controls our information benefits by feeding us this information. Those who controls our information benefits from keeping us divided. Those who controls our information benefits from keeping us demoralized. Now, given the white society's history, why wouldn't they do these things I'm saying to you? Why wouldn't they? Has the white society ever earned the blind trust of black people? Never. We are being programmed. And as long as we remain ignorant and we keep clinging to a biblical fairy tale or a slave syndrome myth, we will remain in this state. You know, the time of believing in dumb shit has now passed. You know, we are the people who built the pyramids. So this collective state is not us. You know, speaking of the pyramids, so you understand everything's a social science. Now, remember when I said that a people's history, people reference themselves based upon the history they're taught about themselves? This is why the white society ignores all evidence that the ancient Egyptians of Africa were black. Because the monumental achievements of the ancient Egyptians of Africa contradicts their narrative of their superiority over black people. So what they've done, that's why they even created the propaganda term, the Middle East, the Middle East. They kept propagating it during the 70s, the Middle East, the Middle East, the Middle East, the Middle East, where the Middle East propaganda was used to psychologically separate Egypt from Africa in the minds of the masses. But here is the reality. The Arabs who now occupy Egypt did not arrive there until the 7th century. The Greeks did not arrive there until the 7th century. Carbon dating testing of the ancient kingdom has scientifically proven that the ancient kingdom is thousands of years older than before the Arabs arrived. Thousands of years older before the Europeans arrived. It was built by Africans. DNA analysis performed on King Tutankhamun, King Ramses II, Ramses III, and several other Egyptian mummies in 2011, 2012, 2013, scientifically proved that they were Africans. Their DNA matched current day sub-Saharan Africans. But see, you haven't heard this. This is suppressed. This is suppressed because the white society already made up their mind that they're gonna make Egypt their ancient history. Because the Egypt ancient history gives them a history that inspires their future. This is why they separated themselves from the caves of Europe, uninspiring caves, and placed themselves upon the inspiring thrones of Africa's Egypt. And it's why they ignore all evidence that the ancient Egyptians were in fact Africans. Because they're using the narrative that the ancient Egyptians were Caucasians to bolster the collective self-esteem of their masses, thus inspiring their future. As a result of this social science, the collective self-esteem of Caucasians has been falsely bolstered at the expense of the collective self-esteem of we Africans. Now, we Africans must recognize the social science and then develop counter strategies against it. Like the example I gave about once you realize that your well is poisoned, you stop believing in crazy, simple myths and you say, okay, my well's being poisoned. Let me develop systems to save my people. This is why people must have the proper understanding of their plight and condition. This is also why white oppressive forces have spread so much disinformation that divides us, confuses us. It's a social science used for maintaining white dominance. Willie Lynch never existed, and believing it hinders black liberation, causes division among us, It causes us to believe our problem lies within ourselves. There are many black people walk around saying, we're cursed. I believe we're cursed. Why? Ask yourself, those black people who insist that there's something wrong with us, where are they getting the narratives from? All of our narratives comes from the white society. All of our narratives. The white society tells black women what they believe about black men. The white society tells black men what they believe about black women. You've seen those reports. You always hear these things every so often propagating. Study shows that white men treat their women better. Or study shows that black women are abrasive and a lot more, are less supportive than white women. Now, a critical thinking person, a person who studies facts, knows that's BS. But see, the average masses do not study these facts. They keep hearing it. And you may think for a while you dismiss it. You dismiss it. But then after a while, it starts to weigh you down. You become besieged by it. You start to believe it. And once you start to believe it, you are mentally enslaved by them. Okay, it's a social engineering system that's designed for maintaining their white dominance. We exist within a system that most black people don't understand. And when we say that our condition is connected to a slave syndrome, that's no differently than a soldier marching into war with a toy gun. A soldier marching into war with a toy gun will be slaughtered. We have to function based upon the truth of our plighted condition. And the truth of our plighted condition is that the white society exploits its monopoly over information that are fed into the collective minds of black people to shape our minds to think in ways that serve and protect the system of white supremacy. You have to understand what's being done to us. This is a little off subject, but it's in the same vein of how they use their monopoly to condition us. I said in the 1960s that they had to attack our self-esteems. They had to turn us against ourselves. This leads to the nigger campaign. The nigger campaign. As you know, those of you who are old enough to know, during the 1960s, many African Americans despised the word nigger. In fact, at a dinner table, you couldn't say the word nigger. Some of your parents, your grandparents slapped the hell out of you if they heard you say the word nigger. You know why? Because that generation of African Americans knew the brutality that often accompanied the word nigger. Those African Americans knew the numbers of loved ones they buried merely because the white man perceived them as niggers, murdered. So they knew the ugliness behind the word. So how would we say it now? It was a part of the programming of the African American. Most people believe that the media reflects our reality. This is not true. Most people most often imitate how they see their image depicted within the media. People often become those derogatory media images of themselves that they accept as being their reality. So what the white propagandists did, they started hiring actors and producing these black movies, and they hire actors to call themselves niggers repeatedly, niggers. Now, the young people, they rushed to those black movies. They were called black exploitation films. And they were attractive because they showed black people in leading roles. They showed black people fighting the man. So we saw ourselves in leading roles. But accompanying this leading role, these actors were hired to call themselves niggers and bitches. The young people watch and say, that's our thing. So you go home and your grandparents say you call yourself niggas. And when your grandparents attempt to correct you, say, no, grandmama, you don't understand. That's how we say it now. We call ourselves niggers. Untrue. You call yourself niggas because you were conditioned to do so because you saw actors on the screen call themselves niggers. Now that was a program because when black people call themselves niggers, it has an effect upon us. Words, when repeated often enough, affects our thinking. When those thoughts are held long enough, they shape our biology. We become what we call ourselves. This is why a man who insists he's a thug is more likely to engage in a fight than to avoid it. This is why a woman who proclaims herself a bitch becomes stubbornly unreasonable. We become what we repeatedly call ourselves. It's a psychological phenomenon that white social scientists have thoroughly studied. Now, when they hire these actors to call themselves niggas on the screen, and our black children flock to these programs, we say, oh yeah, okay, we're niggas, we're niggas, we're niggas, we're niggas. When we believe we're niggers, it has an adverse effect upon us because it subconsciously conditions us to perceive ourselves through an inherent marginalized position in the white society. Now let's look at it collectively. First of all, they miseducate us, that we haven't invented anything. They tell us that we have no history. They denigrate our image. Now they condition us to call ourselves niggers. Call ourselves niggers. I'm going to show you a social something. It's almost impossible to find a black man who refuses to sag. I'll put this right. Who refuses to sag, who insists that he's a nigger. You would find that most of those who sags are the ones insisting that they're niggers because they believe that's how niggas are supposed to dress. They sag because that's how we niggas are supposed to dress. The word nigger, believing that they're nigger, it affects their behaviors. Now, every so often, the white man spreads propaganda to keep us calling ourselves niggers. He said, okay, nigga, try N-I-G-G-A, and propagate in our community. And those of us who are ignorant grabs it. Now, the latest one being, hey, there's a place in Africa called, there was an ancient word in Ethiopia called niggers. Let's use that, niggers. Now, here's the catch. Here's a fact. If you critically think. In Africa, there are over 2,000 languages and dialects. And each of those language and dialects has at least 3 to 4 words that also means king. With that many thousands of words in Africa meaning king, why is it we're only hearing propagated through our community is the word niggers, N-E-G-U-S, that sounds exactly like the word niggers, N-I-G-G-E-R-S? Why? Stop being gullible and feeble-minded. Here is why. Because when we use the word niggers, the subconscious mind doesn't see the different spelling. So when we call ourselves niggas, we try to override the original programming. Say, no, niggas means king. Niggas mean king. But if you notice, those who call themselves niggas, whether it's N-I-G-G-A or N-I-G-E-U-S, or niggas, the traditional one, their behaviors are the same. There is no difference in their behavior. Nigger, by any spelling, is still a nigger. You see, social science, those who study the human mind, okay, they've studied this for years, and they've weaponized it against us. And here's our problem. We don't have any more true black leaders here in America. Where you have these puppet leaders, these leaders who their job is to actually benefit the white society. Edgar Hoover himself said it. The next time there'll be a black prophet in America, we will have created him. See, the white society learned that first of all, there are many of us still today who possess the ability to stand on a national platform as Dr. King did and as Malcolm X did. But those among us are not given a national platform. Only ones who are given a national platform are those who are who works for the white society, or those who perpetuate negative stereotypes that benefits the white society. We exist within a system, a very complex system. I know in some ways this may have been a little complicated for others. Okay, I will try to find ways to more simplify it. But it's a social science, and we have to approach it as a social science. And we have to develop the counter measures necessary to liberate ourselves. And it's nothing to do with Willie Lynch, and nothing to do with slave syndrome. As long as you continue believing those, you do a disservice to our future generations. Because as long as this system continues to work, the white man will keep using it. He has no intention to stop using the social engineering system. And we're going to have to stand up and push against it. Develop countermeasures. The ignorance of the oppressed is truly the oppressor's greatest power. Sadly, many of the oppressed repeat that narrative, but don't realize that they are amongst the ignorance of the oppressed. Elevate your minds. One love and peace, brothers and sisters. One love and peace.